CNN 10, I'm Azuz. We are 10 minutes of world news explained. That starts today with tensions over trade between the U.S. and China. The Asian country announced yesterday that it was putting tariffs or taxes on about $3 billion worth of imports from the U.S. The tariffs are on 128 American-made products, ranging from pork and fruit to steel pipes. This will make it more expensive for American businesses to sell those products in China. And China says this was done as a response to the tariffs that the U.S. recently put on imports of Chinese steel and aluminum. Meanwhile, U.S. President Donald Trump says more tariffs, new ones worth as much as $50 billion, are being planned by the U.S. on additional goods from China. So one big question is, will all this cause a trade war when countries take turns putting tariffs on each other's goods, causing prices to rise? We don't know yet. The U.S. and China ship hundreds of billions of dollars of goods back and forth every year, so the tariffs we've seen so far are a tiny part of that. And America's Treasury Secretary says the U.S. and China are talking behind the scenes about how to prevent a possible trade war. But a number of experts are concerned this could turn into one, and so are some stock investors. The Chinese tariffs were a major factor in a drop of the U.S. stock market yesterday, when the Dow Jones Industrial Average fell 459 points. But just like it's hard to tell if a trade war is on the horizon, it's also hard to tell what kind of effects one could have decades down the road.
What happens in a trade war? Sometimes all it can take is one single tariff to start a trade war. When a government imposes a new tariff, other countries sometimes tend to raise their tariffs in retaliation. That can lead to further tariffs, which can lead to further tariffs, and, well, you get the idea. But let's just talk about one tariff: the chicken tariff. In the 1960s, the Europeans were being inundated with cheap American chickens. Demand for that cheaper chicken skyrocketed, and so Europe, in order to protect their chicken farms, placed a tariff on the American chickens. One thing is certain, though: trade wars bring unintended consequences. So it all started with the Europeans' humble chicken tariff, but then the Americans responded with their tariffs on dexedrine, brandy, and some trucks and cargo vans. While the chicken tariff eventually went away, and so did the retaliatory brandy and dexedrine ones, the automobile ones stuck. They remain to this day, and they're credited with the rise of American car manufacturers' dominance of the truck industry. But some critics say that that tariff-supported dominance has sheltered and protected American companies who haven't been forced to innovate. So what started with chicken ends up inadvertently affecting automobile engineering 5 decades later. Another trade war reality? Loopholes. Companies and countries can creatively avoid some tariffs. This is the Ford Transit Connect. Now, Ford is an American company, but this van is made in Turkey, so it would be subject to the cargo van tariff. But, at least until a few years ago, Ford figured out that if they imported these vans with seats in the back, they could just call them passenger vans and pay a much smaller tariff. Once they made it stateside, they'd strip out the back seat, take out the window, and sell it as a cargo van, and pay no chicken tax. U.S. Customs has since cracked down on Ford's van shenanigans. But with every new tariff comes opportunities to get around them. So what happens in a trade war? Just give it like 50 years.
Full Eagle is the name of military drills being held right now between the U.S. and South Korea, two countries who've been allies since the Korean War ended in 1953 and whose common rival has been North Korea. The war games have been held annually for years. They anger North Korea, which has called them practice for an invasion of the North. The U.S. and South Korea say the drills are defensive in nature. But with change in the air, with North Korea's leader preparing for historic meetings with South Korea's president and potentially with America's president, there are some differences in this year's drills.
It is a discreet and low-key start to the joint US-South Korean military drills this year. A very different situation to what we usually see. But clearly South Korean and US officials don't want to provoke Pyongyang at a time when relations are thawing. And of course there is that summit coming up between Moon Jae-in and Kim Jong-un, dated for April 27th. So what we're seeing at this point is the Full Eagle field exercise military drills have started this Sunday. They'll go for a months, but that's half the time that they usually last. Last year, for example, they went for 2 months. We are hearing, though, from the Pentagon and from South Korean military officials, they'll have the same scope, the same scale as previous years. We know there are 11,500 US troops within Foal Eagle. There's 290,000 South Korean troops. But one interesting thing we should mention is that we haven't heard about any media days. Usually we have heard about that by this time. I'm hearing that potentially we won't be seeing very much. We won't be invited to film very much, as in previous years. We do film it, we show it to the world, and of course North Korea sees the capabilities of the US and South Korean militaries. So potentially we will hear very little response from North Korea if they are not seeing exactly what these very visual and what they believe to be provocative military drills are.
Schools are closed today in Oklahoma City, the capital of Oklahoma, but not for spring break. Teachers there are among tens of thousands who are protesting for more school funding and better pay. Their rallies have stretched across Kentucky and Arizona too. Oklahoma's teachers, who recently received their first raise in a decade, said there was still an unacceptable lack of funding for things like textbooks and school supplies. Kentucky's teachers are protesting changes to their pension plan, what they rely on for retirement. Their state has a tremendous shortfall in funding for teachers' pensions. Arizona's teachers recently rallied for a 20% pay raise. The state governor's office said they got one of more than 4% from 2016 to 2017, but teachers there also want more funding for education in general. This is all happening within a month of a strike by teachers and school staff in West Virginia, which resulted in pay raises there. The largest funding source for schools is the government of the state they're in. You've heard the expression, whatever floats your houseboat? Or is it a boathouse? And does it cost a yacht of money to keep it afloat in ship shape? They say no man's an island, but they didn't exactly get roped into living on a man-made island. Guess they just kind of like it that way. I'm Cral Azuz, sounding off for CNN.